If you were fixing your bra straps, fussing with wires, or battling your bra during this podcast, stop right now. You'll want to hear this. Those bra problems, those problems you thought you had to live with, Third Love has solved them. Their bras make it easy to get what you want, whether it's ultimate cleavage, a smooth look, or stopping your shirt buttons from pulling. With over 60 sizes, including half cups you won't find anywhere else, you'll never be stuck between two sizes that don't fit. So stop settling for bad bras. Now's the time to treat yourself and get your problem solved. Save $15 on your first order with code podcast15 at thirdlove.com.
Hello, I'm Rabia Chaudhry. I invite you to join me every Tuesday for new episodes of Nighty Night Bedtime Stories to Keep You Awake, now on Podcast One. This new incarnation of Nighty Night is an anthology of stories that bring to life classic horror stories, some you're definitely familiar with, and others you'll be hearing for the first time. Join me as I tuck you into bed with stories that will leave you sleepless all night long. Get new episodes of Nighty Night every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 345 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
You know, first episode of 2024. I'm not going to make any predictions about the year, how it's going to go, because I got in big trouble last time in 2020 when I did that. But let's keep our fingers crossed.
Exactly.
Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Rosie W.
Hey, Rosie.
Kimberly C.
What's going on, Kimberly?
TJ Lefevre.
Hey, TJ.
Jennifer Beard.
What's going on, Jennifer?
Rockin' Rose jumped out to her highest level.
Awesome, Rose. Thank you.
Kathy Turner jumped out to her highest level.
Well, thank you, Turner.
Linda.
Well, hi, Linda.
Kukin Star.
Well, what's up, Star?
KY Newport.
AKY.
Matt Manley.
What's going on, Matt?
Lindsay Buckwald.
Good old Lindsay.
Carrie Buckland.
Hey, Carrie.
Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
And last but not least, Jane Harris.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Jane.
And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Kay Krasinski.
Isn't she related to John?
Krasinski?
Yeah.
No.
You sure?
Not spelled even close.
Well, they changed the way it's spelled.
Oh, because he's an actor?
Yeah, but it's said the same way.
That would make sense that he changed it to that.
Yeah.
So the holidays are behind us, and we're ready to get into this new year. We also have a brand new episode out on True Crime All the Time.
We do.
Where we're talking about James Sullivan. This is a guy who was going through a contentious divorce with his wife, and it's kind of a murder for hire situation. But the kind of fascinating part of it was that police were onto this guy from the get-go. It just took them like 15, 19 years to finally get him.
Took a bit of time.
It took a long time. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We're talking about a pretty big unsolved case, pretty well known, the Axeman of New Orleans.
New Orleans.
The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified serial killer who attacked approximately a dozen people in the early 20th century. Several people, including a young child, were murdered. Over a century later, the Axeman has never been identified, and the murders remain unsolved. But this is, like I said, a fairly well-known case. This is one of those that, people really like to debate online. I won't say it rises to the level of like Jack the Ripper or anything like that, but it's a fairly well-known unsolved case.
Yeah, it really is. You remember when we went to New Orleans?
I did, for CrimeCon.
Sipping on your chicory coffee?
Yeah, that was one of the best ones. Me and you all by ourselves eating beignets and drinking. I was drinking coffee. You don't drink coffee for some reason.
I think I even paid that day.
Yeah, which was probably the most memorable part about it.
Yeah. It was only like less than $5.
I know, but I saw you open your wallet and the money was actually given. Most historians agree that the murders occurred in 1918 and 1919, but some historians believe the murders go back to 1910. And, we struggle when we're talking about killers on TCAT. There's always that question. Okay, it's thought that they killed 5 people, 10 people, but what could the number really be? And how far back, could their killing have started?
Yeah, and then you also have the fact that sometimes there's copycat killers doing the same type of killings.
Yes.
So you're like, do we know that's actually them, or was that somebody else?
Somebody who's trying to get away with a murder, but is going to make it so similar to this other series that the police are going to assume that that's part of it.
Yeah.
In most of the cases, the victims were attacked with an axe, usually their own, in the middle of the night. The suspect often broke into homes by removing door panels and occasionally snuck in through a window. The original investigators believed the attacks were not robberies gone wrong. Money was stolen in some cases, but there were several cases where money and valuables were untouched. It seems as if the suspect was motivated by a desire to kill, because he left soon after the attacks were committed and most likely assumed the victims were dead or would die soon. So, when we talk about motivations for killers, there's the lust killers. There's people who kill for money.
Yeah.
And they're all scary. But, I think for me, what is truly terrifying is the motivation just to kill.
I'm just going to kill you just because I want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about a lot of one-off murders where people have said, well, I just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Very strange. I'll never understand that. But when you have a serial killer where you're talking 10, 12, maybe more victims, and the only apparent reason for the murders is that this person just wanted to kill. Okay, that's scary stuff. The vast majority of the Axeman victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans who owned grocery stores. Because of this, media outlets suggested that the mafia was involved in the murders and attacks, but there really was no strong evidence to support this.
But you know how people talk.
Well, they do. And I was kind of thinking about a scene in Godfather 2 where De Niro's working at that little grocer.
Yeah.
The guy took him in kind of, but then the big mafia guy comes in. He wants his relative to work there. So the guy has to fire De Niro. Now you can make a case that maybe the mafia was shaking down these stores and some of these people didn't want to pay. And so I can see where maybe that comes in as a possibility.
Could have.
Before we go into the timeline of the Axeman attacks, I think it's important to establish some historical context. Because we are talking about, over 100 years ago.
We are.
In 2017, author and historian Miriam Davis published her book, The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story. Her goal was to try to uncover the facts of the case. She is one of the historians who believe the attack started in 1910. At that time, the press called the suspect the Cleaver.
Not Ward.
No, definitely not Ward. I'm trying to figure out which one's scarier, the Axeman or the Cleaver. They're both pretty scary.
I think if they're coming at your head, either way,
you're going to need to change your drawers if you make it out alive. In her book, Davis argues that several murders that were attributed to the Axeman were more likely the result of organized crime. She explained to Vice that there was no official mafia in New Orleans, but there were types of crimes that she called peculiar to Italian immigrants and perpetuated by various gangs. And we'll talk about some of this in detail a little bit later. Davis suspects that based on witness descriptions, the crimes were most likely committed by a white laborer who held a grudge against successful Italians. She also believes that 3 attacks committed against non-Italians were not committed by the Axeman. So this is definitely a case where people disagree.
A lot of debate.
There's a lot of debate on the number, but also, which crimes to attribute to the Axeman and which ones shouldn't be. Even though, Davis believes that these 3 cases that, she talks about are almost always included in the list of Axeman attacks. By the time of the murders, Italian grocers dominated the corner grocery niche in New Orleans. According to Smithsonian Magazine, there had been an Italian business community in New Orleans since before the Civil War. The earliest immigrants primarily came from northern Italy, but in the late 19th century, there was an influx of Sicilians into Louisiana, most of whom worked as laborers. By the late 19th century, Sicilians made up over 80% of Italian immigrants in Louisiana. By 1900, New Orleans had the largest Italian community in the South, with around 20,000 Italians living in the city.
It's a big number.
Yeah, seems like a pretty big number. I don't know how many people lived in New Orleans at the time, but it was 1900.
It was, yeah. I'm Italian, so
you got that going for you.
I do. I'm like 1.6% Italian or something like that.
Oh, does this come from your DNA test thing that you did?
Yes. So,
Did it also say you were 3.6% full of, what?
I think that number was higher.
Higher than that. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Italians experienced racial prejudice in the 19th and early 20th centuries. At this time, many people didn't consider Sicilians to be white.
You see that a lot in some older movies too.
You do. I mean, even newer movies where they're going back and trying to be historically accurate. One that comes to mind is one of my favorites is Gangs of New York. And in that movie, they do a really good job of presenting the prejudices that people had, from one country against another. They all lived in the U.S. at that point, but, there was even a group in that movie where they were born in the U.S. Now, their parents had immigrated from somewhere else.
Exactly.
But because they were born in the U.S., they were prejudiced against these people that had just come in from wherever, Ireland or Scotland or who knows where. It was reported that Italians often worked alongside black people in their labor jobs. Italian immigrants didn't understand racial hierarchies in the South, but non-Italian white people in Louisiana thought their willingness to work with black people gave them a lower status.
What a crazy thought.
Yeah, it's such a strange thought. If anything, they were just tolerant. They were willing to work with whoever. And maybe rightfully so, they thought there shouldn't be any racial hierarchies.
Probably didn't make sense to them, as it shouldn't have.
Eventually, many Italians left their labor jobs on sugarcane and cotton plantations to start their own businesses. By 1900, there were Italian-owned small businesses all over the state. And grocery stores were a popular choice amongst business owners. In 1880, Italians owned 7% of grocery stores in New Orleans. By 1920, Italians ran 50% of all grocery stores in the city.
It's a big number.
It is. But I think, if I remember correctly, one of the best muffalettas that you can get is at the Italian grocery. I think that's the name of it. I can't remember.
I'll believe you.
I could be wrong.
You and your muffalettos.
Oh, I like a good muffaletta.
You look like you like a good muffaletta.
I look like I've eaten a lot of muffalettas. Now, when we were in Miami on vacation, I had a lot of Cuban sandwiches.
Did you?
Which I really, really loved.
Yeah.
And I looked it up ahead of time, the best one in Miami, and we got one. And it was amazing.
It was on target.
Smithsonian Magazine reported that many Sicilians were distrustful of authority and settled their dispute with a system of justice called a vendetta, blackhand crime, where a victim was threatened with violence or blackmailing if payment wasn't made, was also common in Italian communities in the U.S.
I remember the Black Hand. Do you remember that Black Hand in the movie?
Are you talking about Peaky Blinders?
Yeah.
Okay. That wasn't a movie. That was a series.
Yeah.
That's the movie kind of threw me, but I thought that's where you were going.
Right.
And I think we've all heard the term vendetta. According to historian Humbert Nelly, there were criminal gangs in New Orleans, but their crimes could not be ascribed to the mafia. In the early 20th century, people in media outlets used the term mafia and Black Hand interchangeably to refer to a formal criminal organization. And I kind of get that. I think that happened, much later. When you think of an organized criminal enterprise, is it technically the mafia? Maybe not, but would somebody refer to it like that?
I think so.
Yeah, it's almost like saying Kleenex.
Yeah.
Kleenex is a brand.
Right.
Although we always say, hey, can you hand me a Kleenex?
Not a tissue.
Not a tissue. But because of this, many New Orleans residents suspected that the attacks were connected to a vendetta or Black Hand crime. So obviously, we're talking about the Axeman crimes now. However, several prominent members of the police department thought the crimes were committed by a fiend who felt an impulse to kill. You know what word you don't hear used all that often anymore? Fiend.
You really don't. Besides the one video game, it's the only time I've ever heard it in the last 20 years.
It's just not used that often. All right, now let's get into talking about the murder cases most commonly associated with the Axeman of New Orleans, starting off with the cases from 1910 to 1911. Now, remember, we said it, but at this time, the suspect was called the Cleaver in the papers. On August 13th, 1910, Harriet and August Crudy, new owners of a local grocery store, were attacked by a man who broke into their house in the middle of the night. Harriet woke up to find a man standing over her bed, holding a meat cleaver. He threatened to attack her if she didn't give him all their money. He had already attacked her husband, who was lying beside her in bed. Pretty scary anytime somebody shows up in your house or bedroom, especially with a cleaver.
Yeah.
The suspect stole $8 from their house and stole their pet bird from its cage.
$8 back in 1910 was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. The pet bird seemed strange, but Mr. Crudy was able to give a description, and a neighbor saw the attacker leaving the house. He was seen walking across the street, lighting a cigarette and putting his shoes on. You wouldn't think that if you were, breaking into someone's house, injuring them, and stealing their money, that you would take with you an animal that makes noise. You wouldn't want to draw any attention to yourself. That's why the bird to me seems so strange.
Maybe for him it was symbolic.
Maybe. August suffered head and chest injuries, but made a full recovery at the hospital. The police discovered that the killer removed a pane of glass from the kitchen door, most likely in an attempt to reach the deadbolt inside, but he was unsuccessful and had to pry open the door with a railroad pin. The meat cleaver was stolen from a nearby market stall that had been broken into. And it turned out that the family's bird was found on their roof the next day. Okay, so you take the bird, kill the bird, and then throw it on the roof. Didn't say it was dead, but I'm assuming it was.
Yeah, why would it still be there?
Right.
Yeah. But thinking about breaking into that house, back then, that's how those houses were, right? They were just, the window panes were either just glazed in or had just some wood trim piece holding it in. So if you can pop the glazing off or pop the wood trim off, you lift that glass out, you're reaching in and undoing the door lock. You're in. So no wonder he tried that first.
Yeah, let's face it, in the early 1900s, I don't assume most houses were that impenetrable.
Yeah.
True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to Gibby and I talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. By the end of August, a man named John Flannery was arrested in connection with the Crudy assault. Authorities would soon have doubts, though, about Flannery's role in the attack. On September 20th, 1910, Conchetta and Joseph Rossetto were woken up in the middle of the night by a man holding a meat axe in their bedroom. The attacker struck Conchetta and Joseph multiple times. According to the Times-Democrat, Conchetta was hit once on the head and once on the neck. Joseph was hit in the face, which severed his nose.
I mean, it's really brutal if you think about it, right? You have this meat axe coming at you.
Yeah, when I think about someone swinging a cleaver, an axe, whatever you want to call it, into my face, that is not a good thought.
And then to lose your nose, I think that would hurt.
So you think it would hurt for a part of your body to be chopped off?
Yes.
Okay. I think you're correct on that. You might be going a little Mr. Obvious, but I do think you are correct. Joseph was blinded in one eye, and Conchetta was disfigured. As a result of her injuries, Joseph regained consciousness a few minutes after the attack and fired 2 shots from his revolver to get his neighbor's attention. The authorities quickly arrived to investigate. Well, that's a good way.
Quick thinking.
To get people's attention is to, do a desk pop, fire off a couple of rounds. The attacker climbed in through their unlatched kitchen window. He stole nothing from the home and left behind $23 in their grocery store cash register. The attacker didn't steal $35 in a gold watch sitting on a dresser. The killer also didn't steal from an open safe containing $400. That's a lot of money.
That's a whole lot of money back then. If you don't take the $23 and the $35, let alone you don't touch the $400, you're not there to rob the place.
No, I think it's pretty evident that you're there to kill, or as I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the episode, you're there to send a message at the very least. The meat axe, which was stolen from a butcher, was left in the bedroom. So we have 2 attacks, both grocery owners. The other thing is I thought was interesting, both of the weapons were stolen from other businesses.
Yeah.
And then left at the scene. At the time of the second attack, it was speculated that John Flannery could be released if the police decided that the same suspect assaulted the Cruduses and the Rosettos.
Well, that would make sense, right? I mean, he was in custody with them on the second attack, so if they thought the same person did both, obviously it couldn't have been him.
According to the Times-Democrat, a black man named Frank Armstead was held in custody. Armstead had what was called a bad reputation and reportedly saw Joseph Rossetto with $200 before the attack. The Times-Democrat acknowledged there was no real evidence against Armstead. Rossetto said that black people in the neighborhood might have disliked him because he refused to give them credit at his store. So, I mean, I think obviously here we're seeing a lot of racism. There was no evidence against this guy, but he was black, and some of the black people might not have liked Joseph, so we better pull him in. That's pretty brutal.
It is brutal.
Rossetto also scoffed at the idea that the Black Hand was behind the attack, claiming he'd never received a blackmail letter. Now, this Black Hand theory, it's pretty pervasive. I mean, there are people who subscribe to the theory. I would say if this guy actually did receive a letter and he did believe he was attacked by the people behind it, he probably would keep his mouth shut about it.
I would think so too. I wouldn't think he'd come out and say, "Oh yeah, I got the letter and I just chose not to do what they asked."
Yeah. Armstead was later sentenced to a month in prison, but the Times-Democrat didn't specify his charges. I'm sure they just called it vagrancy and
left it at that.
Because
we know whoever attacked this family didn't take all that money. And he said that
he saw him with $200. Yeah. So if you're using that to haul him in, it kind of goes in his favor, right?
Yeah.
Because you're saying he saw him with $200. Well, that must have mean that he wanted the $200, but then the killer doesn't take any money. So how could it, how do you put two and two together? In November 1910, a jury found John Flannery to be insane and a menace to the peace and safety of the community, per the Times-Democrat. They recommended that he be sent to the criminal branch of the insane asylum at Jackson, later renamed East Louisiana State Hospital. The Times-Democrat, a local paper, reported that he was arrested for the assault of August Crudy, but did not specifically report that he was convicted of the assault.
Kind of strange how it worked back then.
Yeah, I think in a lot of situations, it was different than what we would expect to, see today. The process was different. Now we have done cases that are much more recent where people have been hauled in without any real evidence tying them, to the crime.
And we've seen some strange activity in some of the parishes in Louisiana.
Oh, we've covered a number of cases in Louisiana, and it's just a little different down there.
Yeah.
The way things work.
Yeah.
Than what we're used to.
Exactly.
The first fatal attack occurred in 1911. On June 27th of that year, 26-year-old Joseph Davy and 16-year-old Mary Davy, his pregnant wife, were asleep in bed after closing up their grocery store for the night. Mary woke up to see a stranger standing in their room. The stranger demanded that Mary give him her money. She tried to shake Joseph awake, but she didn't know that he had already been attacked. Mary kept $65 under her pillow, but she was too shocked to speak. The man moved around the room, searching for money, but couldn't find any. He became enraged and threw a heavy bowl at her, which hit her between the eyes and cut her face. Ultimately, the man didn't take any cash or jewelry and left the house. Joseph Davy was severely wounded. The Times-Democrat reported his head was battered almost to a pulp.
Wow.
Okay, that's very descriptive.
It is.
Also, pulp was a word that was used a lot. If you think back about, early fighting days, boxing days, they would say, that guy was beaten to a pulp.
Yeah.
Well, not really, because I think this probably was actually more of a accurate description.
Yeah.
Joseph died at the hospital over a day later. In this case, the weapon was never found, but based on his wounds, it was believed to be a butcher's cleaver. The killer snuck in through a window. Joseph created a makeshift security system by stringing up cans in the bedroom doorway, hoping it would wake him if there was an intruder. He also kept a loaded revolver at his bedside, but he never got the chance to use it. The killer avoided the cans and attacked him as he slept. Okay, pretty ingenious.
How sad is it that you have to rig something like that up before you go to bed?
Well, I'm assuming it's because you have to keep your windows open because you have no air conditioning. But also, I guess depending on how he rigged it up, is it all that difficult to kind of sidestep, cans on a string or quietly move them?
Probably not.
Probably not.
And some people sleep so heavy anyway that
I wouldn't hear it.
I mean, I could bang on a cowbell and people I know will still be asleep.
Yeah. I would just say we need more cowbell. Mary Davy described the attacker as a short, stout, clean-shaven man wearing a blue jumper and dark pants. And I wasn't exactly sure what a blue jumper was. I always thought a jumper was something like my kids wore when they were little.
You probably wear a jumper.
No, I wear a onesie. It's different.
Okay.
Other witnesses had described the suspect as a white man who spoke English and had no Italian accent. Now, we kid a lot about accents. You do a lot of accents. Most of them are horrible.
They're really good.
But, this is something that would be very different back then as opposed to today. If you think about the area where we live, most people around here sound pretty much the same.
They do.
But if you're living in a city in the early 1900s, it was truly a melting pot. You had people from all over.
Oh, yeah.
You had a lot of different accents. So you would have a little bit more in the way of a description, at least as it pertains to an accent.
I'd fit really well in a neighborhood like that.
You would.
I could just change it up all the time.
At the time, detectives expressed their opinion that the Crudy, Rosetto, and Davy attacks were connected. And I don't know how you wouldn't think that they were connected.
Yeah, I mean, the entry, the weapon.
The fact that they were all grocery store owners.
Really weren't robbed of anything.
And we've got descriptions of like a meat cleaver. So you either have the same person doing the same thing, or you've got 2 or 3 people doing the same thing, which is pretty darn scary because they're doing it the exact same way.
Yeah. Well, and you got potential witnesses saying that the suspect looks like this, which are kind of similar too. So.
Yeah, I think it's all kind of fitting in. Detective John D'Antonio, who was considered an expert on the mafia, worked the 3 Cleaver cases with the New Orleans PD. He believed that the theft in the Crudy case was a red herring and that the attacks were committed by a fiend. There's that word again.
Fiend.
Fiend.
What word would you use today instead of fiend?
I think they were using that word kind of as a person who was crazed or, maybe even today mentally ill.
Yeah.
To the point where they couldn't control their actions. I'm not sure. However, the most popular theory was that the mafia or the Black Hand Society of Sicily was responsible for the attacks. And I'm sure they got blamed for a lot of attacks because, it's kind of easy. If you don't know who committed a murder or something, you've heard that before. I'm sure it was the mafia.
Yeah.
We've heard that in more recent time.
And I'm guessing the Black Hand Society, even the mafia, probably didn't mind. It just added more towards.
Oh, it just made them scarier.
Yeah.
Right? If they were trying to strong arm or extort businesses, okay, they would want them to be as scared of them as possible. So, all right, you want to pin that on us? Yeah, that's fine. We'll take it. It was reported that Joseph Davy received 2 extortion letters before he died, and he ignored them both. A week after he was murdered, his brother found a 3rd letter in a trunk in his home.
Well, you know what? If you actually did receive a letter from the Black Hand Society and you ignored it, I'm guessing that's never good.
No. Now, it doesn't say it was that they were from the Black Hand Society, but I think if this is true and these were indeed extortion letters, it would be hard to think that they wouldn't be in some way connected to the crime. The police questioned a truck farmer named Sam Pizzo, who was seen in the Davy grocery store arguing with Joseph a week before he was killed. Pizzo was known for occasionally extorting Italian grocers. Well, so it does seem like this was a a big thing that happened.
So like he was a good suspect.
Yes.
To talk to.
I mean, if it's thought that Joseph got some extortion letters, this guy was seen in the grocery store, he was known for extorting Italian grocers, okay, I could see why they would want to question him. According to Country Roads magazine, Pizzo's neighbor went to the police station and reported that Pizzo threatened to beat his brains in if he didn't give him $10.
Sounds like he was a thug.
Yeah. Well, if you're going into grocery stores and extorting them, and yeah, you're just trying to get money by telling people you're going to hurt them.
Yeah. Well, must have been a big enough scary guy to make people feel threatened.
Several detectives thought Pizzo was the killer, but Mary Davy maintained that her attacker was white and clean shaven. Pizzo had a mustache.
Well, that's a pretty big difference.
It's definitely not clean shaven. On July 1st, 1911, Sam Pizzo and a man named Filippo DeGuano were arrested in connection with the murder, but it does not seem like they were ever convicted based on the sources we found.
Well, I don't think it was abnormal to arrest people, hold them for a while.
That's why I kind of threw out that term vagrancy. You remember
Yeah.
we did an episode a while back where people were just held for periods of time for what was called vagrancy. And it was really just a way for the police to try to, have enough time to dig up something on them.
It also probably calms the community for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if they think that they could possibly have this killer in custody.
Yeah.
Would you sleep a little bit better that night? Yeah, probably. Now, once they're released, then that kind of flies out the window. But I imagine there was a lot of fear.
Yeah, I think there had to be some fear up and people just, some uproar.
Especially if you were an Italian grocer.
I think you would be pretty scared.
But, we talk about some of these victims, they slept with a revolver next to their bed. It was underneath the pillows. The problem is if somebody sneaks into your room and you're asleep and you're a heavy sleeper, you're not going to get a chance to reach over and grab that revolver.
No. But why attack those people? Just out of spite, or did they do something to you at one point that you have this urge that you have to attack them?
Yeah, I mean, we can get into some theories. We've already talked about the Black Hand, the Mafia. That is a possibility. I think you could also look at the angle of a person who had an extreme prejudice against Italians who had come to this country. Now, I don't know where the grocer part comes in, the fact that they were all grocers.
Unless you were a white man that owned a grocery store.
Or wanted to.
And got cut out of the market.
Yeah, maybe.
And felt that you needed to get revenge against that.
The attack stopped until December 22nd, 1917, when Italian grocers Anna and Epifanio Andolina were the victims of another axe attack. So this is a long period of time in between attacks, but here we go. We have an axe. We have a couple who own an Italian grocery. Anna woke up to a figure standing over her husband holding a hatchet. The man told her to shut up and pointed a gun at her. He hit her husband several times with the axe. Anna screamed as he left. The intruder passed through their two sons' bedroom. He hit one of the children in the head with the hatchet and hit the other in the arm with the butt of his gun. The police discovered that the assailant carved a panel out of the back door to enter the home, but he didn't steal a thing.
So everything sounds very familiar again.
Very similar. Now, in this one, this couple has children.
Yeah.
It did seem very odd to me that, this man is on his way out and he's going to hit one of the kids in the head with a hatchet. and then hit the other one with the butt of his gun. Why? For what reason?
Unless he just did not like Italians.
It's hard to figure out. All the family survived the attack. Epifanio died 10 months later from influenza.
It was also interesting. This time, the attacker brought a gun.
Yes, which we had not talked about before. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, the police didn't connect this attack to the cleaver from 1910, 1911. Again, it's been, 6-7 years, but also you had the gun. This could also be because by that point, the lead investigator had been killed and an investigator named Frank Mooney had taken his place.
I mean, to me, it sounds very similar, besides the fact he brought a gun.
Yes. Other than that, didn't steal anything. Now, the following attacks from 1918 and 1919 are the ones that the majority of historians attribute to the Axeman of New Orleans. Grocers Joseph and Catherine Maggio were killed inside their home on May 23rd, 1918. The killer beat their heads with their own axe and cut their throats with a straight razor. Catherine's throat was cut so deeply that her head was almost severed. Joseph survived the initial attack, but died soon after his brothers Jake and Andrew entered the home and found him 2 hours after the attack. So he did survive for a couple of hours, but obviously his injuries were grave and he passed away. Law enforcement found the killer's bloodstained clothing inside the home, which indicated he changed before he left. And this is something we've talked about, a number of times. I think especially when you kill somebody up close, with a knife, with a hatchet, with some type of blunt force object, there is going to be a lot of blood spatter.
Yeah.
So, are you going to leave the house and just walk around with blood all over you? It sounds like this person changed.
Either came prepared.
Or yes.
Or
found something there. But they didn't want to walk out with, blood all over them. $50 was stolen from the house, but other cash and jewelry in plain sight was left untouched. The killer wrote a message in chalk on the pavement near the crime scene that read, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony." This was thought to be a reference to Anthony and Joanna Scambra, two grocers who were killed in 1912. On May 16th of that year, they were shot by an unknown assailant. Anthony was killed during the shooting, and Joanna died 10 days later. The Scambras were shot, but their murders are often listed in connection to the Axeman. Again, one of the problems with this case is it's really hard to figure out which murders were really committed by one person, which ones people just kind of lump in with the Axeman. Now, what I did think was strange about this attack is that it was much more brutal than some of the others that we've talked about. I mean, the cutting of her throat, almost severing her head. She died, sounds like pretty quickly, beating in their head with their own axe, cutting throats, all of that stuff seems a little different from the attacks we talked about earlier.
That, or has the killer gotten better?
Or just changed the way they do things.
Change their tactics.
And maybe now they're more ruthless, more deadly. The Maggio's axe was taken from their yard and left in their bathtub. The straight razor was found on a neighbor's lawn the next day. The murder weapon belonged to Joseph's brother, Andrew, who owned a barbershop in the city.
Well, those straight razors back then were super sharp.
So they're not today?
Well, they are today, too.
They were sharper back then?
Sharper back then.
I always like it when you say something was back in the day like it's not today. Like a straight razor couldn't be sharp today.
Think of how many places used straight razors back then.
They did. And I'm sure they had a good way to keep them sharp.
You ever, You ever had a shave with a straight razor?
No, I've never had someone else shave me.
Really?
I don't trust people enough, I think, with sharp objects.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's nice.
It's nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maggio's employee, Esteban Torres, told the police that his boss took the razor from his shop 2 days before the murders and said he wanted to have a nick, which is apparently an opening mechanism, honed from the blade.
You ever honed anything before?
I have honed some knife blades, I guess. Sharpened them. Is that the same thing?
I don't know.
I think it is.
You just look like somebody probably honed something before.
Yeah, I'm a honer. But as it, relates to Joseph's brother, Andrew, my first thought was, how terrible would that be? Knowing that your brother was killed with your razor.
Oh, it'd be pretty terrible.
But then you have this employee saying, well, the brother took it a couple of days before the murder. So you could see why maybe police suspicion would turn to Andrew.
Yeah.
Which it did, not only because of the murder weapon, but because he lived next door to his brother and said that he didn't hear the attack. He claimed he was drunk after a night out to celebrate before he left to join the Navy. He claimed he checked on his brother when he heard groaning noises. So for me, some of these details are hard to kind of figure out. What do they mean? Okay, was he drunk? And so that's why maybe he didn't hear as well as he would have heard.
Possible.
Were these people surprised and attacked so quickly that they were never able to really make loud sounds that would have been heard outside the home? I mean, their throats were cut. Her head was almost severed. So at some point, she wouldn't have been able to produce sounds.
Right. Yeah, I think, the fact that, like you said, he was drunk and with their throats cut, possible he didn't hear anything.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. But you'd have to say, this taking of the razor, that close to the murder. You could see why police were suspicious. Add on top of that, I think they were surprised that he said he didn't hear anything because the killer had to force his way inside. Andrew was released as a suspect because investigators couldn't get him to confess, and he claimed an unknown man was seen near the home before the murders.
Well, I'm not surprised they couldn't get him to confess. I mean, he's saying he didn't do it. It's his brother. Not saying that people haven't killed their brothers.
No, but I'm also thinking that they were pretty liberal in their ways of trying to get people to confess back then. Yeah. So didn't have the restrictions maybe that are supposed to be in place today.
Well, that's true.
That aren't always followed either. On June 27th, 1918, Louis Bessemer, a Polish grocer, and Harriet Lowe were attacked in the early morning hours at the back of his store. Louis was hit with a hatchet above his right temple, which fractured his skull. Harriet Lowe was hit over the left ear and was unconscious when the police arrived at the scene. Bessemer later said he was attacked as he slept. At 7 a.m., a delivery driver found them in a puddle of their own blood. Bessemer's axe was found in the bathroom of his apartment. It was broken into 2 parts, seemingly from the force of the attack. No money or valuables were stolen from the house.
See, it just sounds like a crime of hatred.
Or, yeah, that, or a thrill kill, or just pretty much anything other than robbery or money related.
But to hit so hard, you break the axe. Yeah.
Now, I don't know what the construction of axes was like back then, but I was just thinking about the description of this man, being hit above his right temple. I mean, you can just press your finger there.
Yeah.
It hurts. So now I'm imagining an axe hitting that.
Full force.
And it doesn't seem pleasant.
No.
At all. Harriet Lowe regained consciousness and said they were attacked by a black man. Her statement was discounted, though, because of her delusioned state, per the Times-Picayune.
I'm sure she was delusioned. Being hit right above your ear with an axe? Yeah.
And, she was unconscious, but she could also have been telling the truth. The police arrested 41-year-old Louis Ubicon, a black man who was employed at the store a week earlier. The police claimed he gave conflicting alibis, but there was no direct evidence that he was the attacker. Ubicon was released due to insufficient evidence. Okay. Again, they are arresting people without what seems to be any evidence whatsoever, other than the fact that he worked at the store a week earlier.
Yeah.
And he was black.
Yeah, they're pretty quick to bring people in and lock them up for a little bit.
Suspicion then turned to Bessemer after letters in German, Russian, and Yiddish were found in his home. The police suspected he was a spy and tried to kill Harriet because she found secret documents. This was supported by the fact that her injuries were worse than his. It was thought that he injured himself to make the attack look real.
Well, that could happen.
That could happen.
It's kind of bizarre thinking you'd take an axe to your own head.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. But, could this guy have been a spy? Yeah, I guess maybe. Did they think a lot of people were spies back then? Yeah, I think they did. But, when you say, okay, I'm going to injure myself to make this whole scene look real, I think I could find some other places maybe to hit myself with the axe other than my head. That's probably one of the last places I would pick. Maybe in the side of my arm, the fleshy part.
Yeah.
Not
my head.
Maybe in the buttocks. That's probably not going to sell it as well, but still, just to smack yourself in the head with an axe. Bessemer was questioned by the Department of Justice 2 days after he was released from the hospital. Weeks later, Harriet told the police that she thought that he was a German spy. Bessemer was arrested on suspicion of espionage and released 2 days later. So basically, all somebody has to say is that I think you did something.
And you get arrested?
And you get arrested. That's what I'm learning from this time period. It's a little scary. Harriet Lowe became a sensational and scandalous figure in the case after reporters found out Bessemer was married and was having an affair with Harriet. People look down on that today, but they really looked down on that back in the day.
Yeah, that definitely was scandalous.
It was much more scandalous. A hospital employee discovered the scandal when Bessemer asked to be directed to Mrs. Harriet Lowe's room, but no woman by that name was listed as a patient. When word got out, Lowe told the Times-Picayune she would no longer help the police with the investigation because she suspected that the chief of police was the one who told the press. Harriet Lowe died on August 5th, 1918, 2 days after doctors performed surgery to try to fix facial paralysis that resulted from the attack. So she obviously was injured quite badly. So, we go back to that, what they called a delusional state. I think it's quite possible that she may not have seen or maybe was remembering it incorrectly. I also think that a lot of people died from surgeries to try to correct something else.
Yeah, that
back then.
But the surgery killed them.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe the doctor just wasn't up to par for that type of surgery, or they didn't have the right equipment to perform it.
Or it was just, the early 1900s.
Yeah. A lot of weird infections.
On August 19th, 1918, Bessemer was arrested a second time for attempted murder based on Harriet's statement that he attacked her. More suspicious documents were found in the home that same day. Bessemer spent 9 months in jail before he was acquitted on May 1st, 1919. The jury only deliberated for 10 minutes.
Yeah, they're probably like, oh, man, here we go again.
They've arrested somebody else.
Yeah.
So we've heard of a lot of quick deliberations. 10 minutes might be one of the quickest I think we've heard of.
Pretty quick.
I think, obviously they knew going in which way everyone was voting. But I think you're going to have that when you keep arresting and trying to convict people based on what, at least today, we would consider to be very little to no evidence.
Oh, I know back then, at this time, if I had a cleaver or an axe, it would be locked up. Not saying that could help me, because obviously this killer is taking axes and cleavers from other residents.
From other places. But here's the other thing that we haven't really talked about. You know, a number of attacks, murders, how much pressure was on the police to stop these, to, put somebody behind bars. There's always that pressure.
Oh, yeah.
In any case like this, but maybe that played a factor in them seemingly rushing people as far as arresting them and all of that. I don't know.
I think if you were a person that owned a grocery store during this time frame,
I'd be selling and moving to California or something.
Yeah. I just don't think I'd feel comfortable at nighttime.
And, obviously in part 2, we're going to talk more about, some break-ins, assaults, more murders. We'll hear about the investigations, more arrests and releases. And we'll talk about the infamous letter by the Axeman. And then we'll also dive into some theories. We've already talked about some already.
But that letter he wrote, it's something.
Chilling.
Yeah.
We'll get into it in part 2. I mean, as we just wrap up part 1 here, there's definitely things that jump out at you. The fact that so many Italian grocers were targeted, obviously to me, that means something.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's not a coincidence that this person just happened to break into and attack people who were Italian grocery owners. That's obviously not how it happened. But why were they chosen? Because to me, that's a big part of solving the mystery. Was it because they were Italian? Was it because they were grocery owners, or both?
Yeah.
And what does that mean
to that killer?
To who would ultimately be the killer? Somebody who was fired from a grocery, someone who was fired from an Italian grocery, someone who just did not like Italians.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there were a lot of Italians in Louisiana at that time. So why are only people who own grocery stores being selected?
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't make sense. So yeah, we're going to have to dive into it and
figure out those connections.
Yep, absolutely. But that's it for our part 1 on the Axeman of New Orleans. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, it's Nishi from Winnipeg in Canada again. I was just listening to an episode of your True Crime All the Time Unsolved, and there was a lady who called in and said how she just loved your voice. Well, that is exactly what I was trying to get to the last time when I said you guys are smooth. It is truly your voices that is smooth and fluid. I love it, and I agree with her. She's amazing. She described it perfectly. So from up here in the cold white north, Nisha signing out. Keep your own time ticking.
Well, you are smooth, and I am fluently.
Fluently or just fluent?
Fluid.
Or fluidity? Is that a word? You're very smooth in your own right.
Yeah.
And fluidity? I don't even know what you said. You just make up words as we go along. But we appreciate the voicemail very much.
We do.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. It's Vicki from the frigid state of North Dakota. About 15 miles from the Canadian border is where I live. I just finished listening to the Max DeVries case, and I was wondering what you guys thought about, could the son have kidnapped the child after the father brought him to the sandbar, period. Maybe they hid him away and later on took him with them wherever they ended up going. Just a thought. Anyway, I love you both, but I'm Team Gibby. Thanks. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's a possibility. That maybe the two were, they had to have been in. If they were involved together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is my thought.
Absolutely. It's also in North Dakota, so, most likely for sure.
She's no longer Team Gibby.
Yes, she is.
No, because you're doing like the hosers from like the Great White North.
That was really close to the border there.
Yeah, but that's like way
North
up
Dakota. There. Like Fargo,
Your Minnesota and your North Dakota is very similar. Which...
Oh, yes. No. Sorry.
You'd think you'd practice some of these in your spare time, but you don't.
We do love you, though. Thank you.
Yeah, we
you don't
appreciate
sound anything like that, obviously.
No. She's going to be like, I sound like that? No, you do not. You don't sound anything like what Gibby just did. I don't think anybody in real life does, but
somebody somewhere.
Somebody somewhere does.
Yeah.
All right. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Hold on to your jingle bells. Pluto TV has all your holiday favorites for free. Enjoy our season's greetings category with 9 holiday channels, including holiday movie favorites by Lifetime, Festive Fireplace, Holiday Lights, and Hallmark movies and more. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming holiday favorites on live channels and on demand. With thousands of free movies and TV shows, Pluto TV is your home for the holidays. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.